What will Ole Miss do if Lane Kiffin ditches them for LSU or Florida? There's a really great option if it happens, maybe.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, the most watched Ole Miss podcast out there. I'm your host, Stephen Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former staff member at Ole Miss as well. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the number one sports podcast network in America, and that's all thanks to you. On today's show, we're going to dive into the uncomfortable question that everyone is thinking about. What happens if the worst case scenario unfolds and Lane Kiffin leaves for any reason? We'll break down the contingency plans that I think they're thinking about and what could possibly be done to protect a football program that's currently operating at the very tip top of the SEC. And next, you will also look at a surprising advantage that Ole Miss might have for a potential next coach, especially with when it's happening before the Iron Bowl. We'll talk about that. But first, let's address the obvious. The next week and a half is likely going to be filled with PR blunders, mixed message, and nonstop rumors. So everybody get ready for that. Now, don't misunderstand this. Lane could absolutely stay at Ole Miss, but nothing in the last 48 hours resembles the actions of a coach that's confidently committed to remaining in Oxford. So today we're going to speculate responsibly about what comes next if he doesn't. All of this and more on today's Locked On Ole Miss podcast. Remember, we're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube, and a special hello to the insiders and everydayers who make this show what it is. Your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first order. Now, the weird stuff, this has been a very, very weird week for Ole Miss, with it starting out on Sunday with Lane's jet setting his family to open SEC jobs to check out the towns of what's going on. You're starting to get wind of offers and numbers that are out there as well. And it very much looks like he's going to end up at LSU. I mean, that's where the tea leaves are pointing right now. And that puts Keith Carter in a weird position, who today has a meeting with Lane Kiffin scheduled on the books. Now, I don't know if that's anything of consequence, if it's just a random thing of them talking. I'm not sure. But it was reported by On3 or whatever that meeting was going to take place today. Is that the ultimatum? Who knows what's going on there? Now, it's interesting because Chris Lowe from On3 put out a tweet that said that the committee would not look at Ole Miss favorably if their head coach left them before the playoffs. If he quit on them before the playoffs, that would adversely affect those kids and what's going on. And instead of a home game, even if they went 11-1, they might be traveling on the road in the playoffs, which, by the way, would be absolutely bunk. And the College Football Playoff Committee should be ashamed of themselves if that even remotely happens. But if it did, this is the point where you have to start wondering what you plan to do next. What comes after Lane Kiffin walking out on you? What comes after? What happens to the football program when Lane Kiffin ditches on a playoff run to go somewhere else for a lot of money? What happens then? And it's interesting because I was thinking about it, because if you go to the Loom Discord and all of that, you can see that there's some doom and gloomers on there that Lane Kiffin is the only reason that Ole Miss is winning games. And Lane Kiffin's a great coach. Nobody's saying that a loss of Lane Kiffin would not be detrimental to the program. Nobody is saying that, at least not with a straight face. But I look at Ole Miss, the university, the way that I looked at LSU in 1999 or 2002 or something like that, when Nick Saban came in and completely rebuilt the organization and handed it over to Les Miles. And Les Miles did not take a step back. the machine was built at that point, and I do believe the machine is built at Ole Miss right now to a certain extent. They have a very well-run player personnel department, an excellent collective. They're pulling the rope in the same direction, and Keith Carter giving leadership at the top is everything that you would hope for. Before Saban got to LSU, they had 8 losing seasons in 13 years. Think about that. 8 losing seasons, including one coach that never had a winning season. This is that turnkey operation at LSU, which shows it's not a turnkey operation. LSU, where they are, their ceiling is incredibly high when they're pulling the rope in the same directions, which they're currently not doing, but I digress on that. That's a job that you can succeed in if you can will everything to go your direction. It's going to be a lot more scrutiny. You're going to be living in the bright lights because they've won for the better part of the last 25 years. Florida, different situation. Steve Spurrier won there. Urban Meyer won there, but they won everywhere. And nobody else has really figured it out. But they are pretty wealthy. And the fans are extremely loyal, if not crazy. So there's positives in both places if Lane decides to go. But Ole Miss is going to be fine. Ole Miss is going to be in a good place because the infrastructure that needed to be built before Lane Kiffin got built. You're talking about shot plays and things like that. You can always find an offensive guru. What you need is a coach that'll buy in to the system, the machine that has been built, similar to what Les Miles did at LSU. If Lane Kiffin leaves, Ole Miss is going to be fine. Ole Miss is going to be in a better place in a coaching search than I can remember, probably since they hired from within Billy Kennard in 1971, which they kind of messed that one up. So this is a chance to get the next hire right if Lane Kiffin leaves. Like I said, don't get me wrong, Lane Kiffin could stay. And with the last week, he's probably costing himself a little bit of money because it's just PR blunder after PR blunder after PR blunder for him right now. But if he leaves, if this is a done deal, you need to make sure and find a way to where every party does this as well as they can do it. Because right now they're not. They were just burning bridges for about a week, and now they're like, what's going on? I've never seen a Q rating go from 100% likable to like 7% likable. I've never seen that. So all of this in place and everything there, this is the answer that I think you need to do if Lane Kiffin will do it. If LSU or Florida will do it, let him sign. If he wants to sign, let him sign. But don't let it come out at all. Treat it just like a kid that committed and signed on signing day and played and committed in an all-star game so he can announce it, so he can have his moment. Make it to where if Lane Kiffin leaves, the other school that he's going to gets no benefit from Ole Miss being in the playoffs. None whatsoever. It's nothing more than rumors and speculation and innuendo. It is nothing real that's going on. LSU's not publicizing the Ole Miss games, or Florida's not publicizing the Ole Miss games as a way to look, hey, this is going to be our coach. And have it set up to where Ole Miss's roster is off limits to Lane Kiffin. I know you can't put transfer blocks on players anymore. This place is illegal. You can't do this. But you need to have a gentleman's agreement that he will leave the roster alone. If that happens, he can coach the playoffs. Everybody will back off. Everybody will go back to pretending like all is well. He will coach the playoffs to the best of his ability. If Ole Miss wins the national title, Ole Miss wins the national title. And 3 days later, he can go off to wherever he's going. And there's another side of this coin that I think Ole Miss could do if they were willing to do this. And this is a big if. Because if you look at all the noise that's in the ether right now, it feels like this wouldn't happen. But if it's an option at all, it probably is the middle ground way to where both schools can end up in their best possible situation. And we'll talk about what else Ole Miss can do next and why the Iron Bowl kind of plays a role in where Ole Miss could be and why it could be an Ole Miss advantage. All of that is coming up next. Listen, college football is back, and I could not be much more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That is why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. I pulled up the Game Time app, and in just a couple of taps, I saw some amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite college football games for as low as $25. Honestly, it's faster, cheaper, and less stressful than any other way I've bought tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Do us a favor. Like, subscribe, and comment on this video. Subscribe to the podcast on whichever audio podcatcher you're listening to and give it a 5-star review. It costs absolutely nothing, but it helps keeps all of this free, and free is good. Locked On is getting ready to change the game yet again in just a few short weeks, all in the name of having fun following your team. It's coming in December. We'll tell you more information when we have it. And thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network in America. That's all on you. Thank you very, very much. Now, one thing that's interesting about this, let's say, like I said, we're speculating Lane could absolutely stay at Ole Miss, whatever. We're just speculating. But let's go off of the thought that I was having before the commercial break, to where you do all of that stuff. Lane coaches the playoffs, the whole 9 yards, all of that. There's going to be rumors, innuendo, but heck, we have that now. We wouldn't do anything different at that point. The one thing that Ole Miss does not want is Florida or LSU to profit in any other way off of Lane Kiffin coaching that game. That's all you have to do. So if you can make it to where that happens, all of a sudden this becomes a 3 or 4 week long thing, and you're going in there, Lane coaches the playoff for as long as the playoff run happens, and you just look over there and it's like, hey, well, unless you hadn't hired a coach, I guess this is pretty obvious, but still, you wouldn't know. And Ole Miss is in a uniquely good position for their potential top candidate if this gets weird. And he is also a potential playoff coach, and that's Jon Sumrall out of Tulane. Heck of a coach, heck of a good guy. He is somebody that would 100% not put his fan base through what has happened over the last week and a half. He would not do that. He would handle it in a completely different way, and I think everybody's on board with that. Now, you might not like Jon Sumrall as a coach. You might have problems with schematics or hiring a defensive coach, the normal coaching search type stuff. But the fact of the matter is, what has happened in the last week and a half would not happen with Jon Sumrall. He would defend this fan base. He would defend Ole Miss. He would be the face of that organization at a level that you would want a head coach to be the face of that organization. You want a coach that will lead the fans and not just be there for the fans, if that makes sense. Jon Sumrall on Friday night, or on Friday night, Ole Miss plays Mississippi State, or Friday afternoon, I should say. So Friday at 4 o'clock, the end of the regular season happens. There could be an SEC championship game. We don't know at that point, because that night Texas A&M has to play Texas. And if Texas wins, the next day, Auburn has to play Alabama, and if Auburn wins, Ole Miss goes to the SEC championship game. So if that happens, you have a day's window before that Auburn-Alabama game to reach out and have contact with Jon Sumrall. That is a 24-hour period to where you can make contact with his agency of what's going on. Because make no mistake of what's going on. The time difference of 24 hours, Auburn, they're trying to hit their home run right now. And I think their home run is Elijah Drinkwitz. They want to land that. They want Elijah Drinkwitz in Auburn. If they can do that is their pie in the sky. But the coach they're kind of keeping warm is Jon Sumrall. And if they can't get anything out of Elijah Drinkwitz, who doesn't play until Saturday as well, then they move quickly to Jon Sumrall. This window would let Jon Sumrall know that Ole Miss is interested and that Ole Miss would probably let him coach Tulane in the playoffs. Because your coach, all that, everything's going on, but the necessity is to keep all of this quiet. Now, I do not know if any of this is possible, especially with the Jon Sumrall people, especially with the Louisiana media in New Orleans and Baton Rouge and all of that. I have no idea if it's possible to keep this quiet. But if you can, it is the best case scenario for both schools, potentially all three schools as well, because both Ole Miss and Tulane would get their coaches for their playoff runs, and whoever hires Lane Kiffin would just sit back and kind of start in mid-January. That is the best case scenario for everybody. That is the speculation that we're all here for, right? Now, do I think that would happen? No, I don't. I think it's going to get messy because people at LSU, for instance, just as an example, or Florida, has no motivation to act like that, to do that with what's going on. Maybe they hire a general manager, something like that, and they just kind of quietly work behind the scenes. I don't know how they could keep that quiet, especially when the attention would help them. Maybe I'm talking weird stuff, but this feels like a good plan. Ole Miss ends up with probably their number one option, who will crawl through broken glass potentially to coach in Oxford, who would defend the fan base, who has won 10 games every single year he has been a head coach so far, and that includes 2 stops at Troy and at Tulane. It makes sense. It makes sense. Jon Sumrall would do a fantastic job representing Ole Miss should Lane Kiffin head out the door. It's going to be interesting to see how it goes. Now, I do think that in the end, Ole Miss is going to win this coaching search. Now, are you going to find somebody as good as an offensive genius or whatever as Lane Kiffin? Probably not. But are you going to find a coach that might be a better fit for what you need and what you want? I think there's a very real possibility that could happen. So here you go. In our final segment, I give my opinion on why Ole Miss will win this coaching round no matter what. I'll explain exactly why coming up next. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. You can even combine your bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at an even bigger payout. It helps keep every game exciting, especially when your team is making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when that first $5 bet wins. So head on over to FanDuel and sign up and play your game with FanDuel.com, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Now, let's be clear. speculating all of this stuff. Lane Kiffin could announce that he is signing with Ole Miss today and stick around. We went through the Auburn situation in 2022 to where it felt like Auburn all the way up until it wasn't. So I am fully aware that that is a possibility. But we're speculating right now about the plan that Ole Miss has in place if Lane Kiffin chooses to go somewhere else. And there's a couple of Godfather offers on the table. It really, really big stuff of what could happen. And I think that no matter what happens, Ole Miss is going to win this coaching search, even if they lose Lane Kiffin. And that's not about the next person that's coming in or anything like that. It's about having the mechanism that they have in place right now to where the collective, the athletic department, everything is aligned. Everything is exactly what you would want to happen. They have one of the better player personnel departments in the entire SEC right now. They have a huge number of analysts, NFL coaches littering all their analyst side left and right. Now, some of those likely are going to go if Lane moves on, but Ole Miss knows that, hey, we can do that. All the coaches in the country know that Ole Miss will pay. Everything is in place for this Ole Miss team to kind of continue what they've been doing. I think the biggest analogy to this would be Les Miles at LSU, bringing him in. It's about keeping the train on the tracks. Don't wreck the Ferrari. You have all of these things in place. Don't get crazy. It's one of the reasons that Jon Sumrall is such a good replacement idea for Lane Kiffin, because a lot of his work in the transfer portal that Lane does in high school recruiting, Jon Sumrall has tried to imitate. He is known about the roster building aspect of what's going on and knew that if he headed down this road, they would be in a good spot. I like that. I'm a huge fan of that. Now, if Lane comes back, it's win. Every Ole Miss fan would prefer Lane Kiffin back over not, no matter how bad the last week was. But in case it goes poorly, because there's a real situation to where the decision has already been made and they're just running out the clock right now because they want to coach the playoffs so bad. That's the reason I talked about it. Keep it quiet. If you're going to go, go. Okay? Just keep it quiet. Let's all pretend like it's not going on. Nothing's going to happen. And Lane Kiffin coaches in the playoff. And then after it's over, then you become the coach of whoever you're with. Kind of keep that on the DL. Do not have that other school try to profit off of this playoff run if it happens. And Ole Miss won't do the same thing to John Sumrall at Tulane should he make the playoffs. And there's going to be a month of uncertainty. It's going to happen. But if it gets quiet, the noise gets weird. If you figure out an answer other than what the answer is at press conferences to where you become antagonistic almost to the media, figure that out. I understand that our fan bases want to know about what's going on, but we need to keep the focus on these players because they are having an unbelievable run. Say that as opposed to, I do not comment on jobs during the season. Say something different, anything different. We all are like pretty sure good at reading the tea leaves right now, except for the people that think that Lane's playing 4D chess on everything. For the NIL portal and all that. But just kind of be cool. Everybody be cool, because the LSU fans, the Florida fans, it's not going to be a riot if Lane leaves. He's been here 6 years. We all expected Lane to leave at a certain point. Lane wasn't going to end his career in Oxford, Mississippi, no matter what he said on an E60 documentary or in a press conference 2 years ago. It just wasn't going to happen. But there's a way to do this to where this breakup is amicable if it happens. Right now, it's not. Right now, it's one side trying to get the girlfriend to break up with him. One side trying to turn the fan base against him, so it's making it a little bit easier when he walks out the door. Right now, that's what's going on. To the point where you're wondering is like, well, he wants to coach the playoffs so bad, but if he's not going to be allowed to do it, how will that affect the Egg Bowl? There's stupid questions that you're asking and running through your mind right now that you shouldn't even have to worry about thinking about are there. That's one of the reasons I doubt that they would have the ability to keep this under wraps. But if they could do that, let Lane coach the playoffs, let him coach it, but let the other school make nothing off of him doing that, of him being a playoff coach. Talk about it after the fact as much as you want to. I don't particularly care. We're going to talk about it as well. We're going to hang a banner the whole 9 yards, but do not profit off of that broadcast. Period. Just like if for some reason Ole Miss hires Jon Sumrall, don't profit off of that broadcast. And if that happens, everything should work out. I think that is the plan. If you look at interims options, if something happens, it would be like Joe Judge. And I do think there's a world to where Jon Sumrall says no, and Joe Judge and Pete Golding kind of get the gig of what's going on. I do think there are some different options. We haven't quite put together a hot board just yet, but I'll be working with Ole Miss 365 on that. So we'll see exactly how that goes. Anyway, instead of the Why Ole Miss Wins, which is my favorite episode to do every single week, I got to sit here and do this to where we just basically responsibly, I think, speculated on what happens if Lane Kiffin leaves. And the answer is, you want to try to do as much damage control as you can do. And if there's a way that they can amicably break up, that's the best case scenario for both people, including Ole Miss, in hiring their next coach, potentially. I think you need to keep it under wraps, but there's so many people that want to unwrap it. It's going to be extremely difficult, especially with a month of time leading on. So maybe you just try to run out the clock a little bit. I don't know how exactly that is going to look. Anyway, thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves in offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the front door of Ole Miss. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. It helps the show, and it's absolutely free. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On SEC. Chris Gordy breaks down the best conference in all of college sports, from the rivalries to the championship and every game in between. Find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hotty toddy, everybody. Remember, analytics is just the old English word that means bad football. We'll see you later.